Very excited here to have Don Hibberd. Prior to his retirement in 2002, he worked for 24 years in the Hawaii State Historic Preservation Office, as many of you know. First as an architectural historian and then as division administrator and deputy state historic preservation officer. Two of his books, The View from Diamond Head and Designing Paradise, consider the development of Hawaii's visitor industry and architecture as a conveyor of history and a sense of place. Other books include Heartwood, Architectural Regionalism in Hawaii, and Buildings of Hawaii. He has taught courses at the University of Hawaii and Hawaii Pacific University in the fields of historic preservation and architectural history. For the past 20 years, he has provided heritage specialist services to various architectural firms, government agencies, and individuals in Hawaii. We're excited to have him to discuss our next topic, so welcome to Don Hibberd.
Good afternoon. Yes, it's working. Good afternoon. Hello. I'll be talking about the Hawaii and National Register of Historic Places and different ramifications of it. Just thought I'd like to start by just talking about the National and Hawaii Registers. Both are responsible for designating historic places, and essentially they look at 5 different types of properties. They look at buildings, they look at historic districts, which would be a group of buildings, look at objects, look at structures, and also at sites, most of which are archaeological, but some of them are not. So I'd like to just start by what is the National Register. The National Register is a federal program. It was established by federal law in 1966, the National Historic Preservation Act, and it looks at properties that are of national significance, but also they can be of state significance or they can be of local significance. The program is run in conjunction with the state. It's a state-federal partnership in which the federal government gives some money and the state also provides money. For the Register program, it is run by the National Park Service. And the process of setting up the program determined what the criteria would be for the program, which I'll go through in a little bit. Also, they were very careful when they started the program. They said, we can't have just one person talking about what is something historic. Nobody will believe that one person. So they set up a whole process where essentially, to get a property to be historic, the state looks at it first. Then they send it to a review board, which in Hawaii is made up of 7 experts. They have degrees in architecture, history, archaeology, sociology, and also someone on the board has expertise in Hawaiian culture. So whenever something is made historic, it's not, like I say, one person. You have the state looking at it, you have the review board looking at it. The review board will decide whether to place it on the Hawaii Register, and will also be deciding whether to recommend it to the National Register. Since the criteria for both registers are the same, they should be doing both. Also, once it leaves the review board, it goes to the National Register, and their staff looks at it. And then finally, the keeper will designate it as a historic site. As I said, besides the National Register, there's also a Hawaii Register. And the Hawaii Register was established by state law. And it's run in the Department of Land and Natural Resources. There's the State Historic Preservation Division, which handles the program. Anyone that wants to try and register a site in Hawaii would have to first go to the state and get information. Again, as I mentioned, the review board will be the one to designate whether something is put on the Hawaii Register or not. And they'll hold meetings 4 times a year, and if your property is approved, it'll be on the register that day. To get something on the register, you need to complete a nomination form. And I show you the first page of it here. And there's only 4 printed pages. Usually when you fill it out, it ends up being maybe 20, 30 pages long with photographs and maps. But they have a 114-page booklet to tell you how to complete those 20 pages. In addition to the 114-page booklet, they also have another 12 or 13 bulletins that talk about specific parts of the form, and how to fill it out, or how to handle a specific property. How do you register a battlefield? How do you register a post office? So the Park Service is quite comprehensive in providing guidance on what to be done. There's several benefits for registering a property. Some of them are more altruistic, some of them are more fiscal. They always point out, first of all, that by registering your property, you'll be gaining recognition. It conveys a sense that, yes, this is an important building. Number 2, it documents the building. It provides a record of the history of that building, which is useful, and the government does keep good track of that. But most people are less concerned with that and more concerned about benefits that can be conveyed by the state or the federal government. There's a number of tax benefits which result from being on the register or making eligible when you're on the register. For commercial buildings, the federal government offers a 20% tax credit for any rehabilitation work. Most of Chinatown has been rehabilitated because of that law. Other buildings that have include the Moana Hotel, the Armed Forces Y, which is now the State Art Museum. These were all restored by people who, one of the reasons they were encouraged to restore it was that they got a 20% credit, which means that essentially if they were spent $1 million on the building, they have a $200,000 tax credit off your federal income tax. And by a credit different than a deduction, that credit, once you get your bottom line, this is how much money you owe, you take the credit off. And many times the credit's larger than what you're paying, so you're allowed to take it over 5 years. So that's one major incentive. The second incentive here in Hawaii, Hawaii passed a state law. Well, actually the state did, the counties did. All 4 counties got together and passed a law. If your residence is placed into the Hawaii Register, then you can get a reduction in your tax. And right now, the reduction goes down to $300. So you pay $300 a year if your home is on the register. A second benefit is only on Oahu is for commercial properties. Commercial properties that are listed on the register, the owners can apply for a 50% reduction in their property tax. If you are on the register, you do have certain responsibilities. If you're going to make alterations and additions to the historic property, they should try and follow the Secretary of Interior standards for rehabilitation. And there's 11 standards. I'm not going to go through those today. But essentially, they're concerned that original material, original design are retained. The state law is very conscious of private property rights. And if you're on the register, the only thing they can do, you have to submit your proposed changes to them. Usually the way that's handled is you need a building permit. The building permit department is going to route it to the state. Under state law, the state has the right to make comments on your proposal. But that's all they're allowed to do, is make comments. So the state can give you free advice. At the end of 90 days, if you don't like their free advice, you can do whatever you want. There's a catch though. Most times, people that want to change their property are also getting the property tax breaks. If you get the property tax breaks, you have to listen a little closer to what the state says, or else they can take you off the register. And if they take you off the register, then you have to pay all your back taxes. So there's that double edge there. Also, designation, once you're on the register, you're on the register. People say, oh, I want to get off the register because I want to tear down the building. And I say, no, you're doing it backwards. You tear down the building and then you get off the register. So you're stuck with being on the register once you're there. There's some things that people talk about that are true, some things about the register that are false. Designation does not mean you have to open up your home to the public at all. The county tax laws do require that the property be viewed from the street. If it's not visible from the street, then you have to allow people once a month to come to a designated spot on the property where the building can be seen. That's once a month. And I've talked to some people and they say very rarely do they see anybody come. And they mainly come because you have to put a little sign up that says, here's the historic property. And I'm sorry, I can't remember which, do you know what day it is, Kirsten?
Second Saturday of every month.
Huh?
Second Saturday.
Second Saturday of every month, they'll put out a sign and then you have to go see. Also, there is another benefit to being on the register. You can get land use, how would you say, exemptions. Like sometimes you can get a zoning exemption. Some areas that are residential zone, like the Red Cross owns a historic building in a residential area. They're able to get a variance from the zoning law. You also sometimes can get variances for not so much health, but for fire. Sometimes they've had some useful discussions with the fire department where they would allow certain exemptions for a historic building. Also, ADA. For ADA, historic properties have exemptions where, like, you have to provide the most direct route for accessible route, but for historic buildings, it doesn't have to be the most direct route to the building. You can have the ADA accessibility from the side or the rear. Also, you're offered alternatives where if you cannot provide services, you can provide alternative services. So there are some greater leeway is given to historic buildings that way. Also, if you do own a historic building, like I said before, you can change it, but you have to go through, discuss it with the state, and see that the standards are met. And essentially, they're just trying to keep the property in as close to original shape as they can, but recognize that there is current uses that have to be addressed as well. So, how do they decide whether a building is historic or not? And essentially, we look at two things. We look at what's called historic integrity, and that means, okay, does the building look like it used to look in the past? Does it still have some sense that you can say, oh yeah, this looks like a historic building. This is how it looked. And the second thing is, how is it significant? Why is it important to be saved? Those are the two things. For integrity, there's 7 different aspects the National Park Service has come up with. And probably 7 are materials, design, workmanship, location, setting, association, and viewing. Probably the first 2 are the ones that people look at the most. Are the historic materials kept, and is the historic design present? Materials are pretty simple. Exterior of the building quite often is the wall, like Armstrong, the lava rock wall is there. They're sometimes quite liberal on other types of material, like roofing. A lot of times, like Bill gets very upset when it's, used to have a shade roof, but now it has a composition shingle roof. But that happens a lot. So they're pretty understanding about that and let some of that slide. So it depends on how important they think it is to the overall appearance of the building. Windows quite often are important. They want to have original wood windows as opposed to vinyl or something like that. Also, I just registered a house last week, and it had vinyl siding. No, vinyl siding's not going to work. So the owner decided, oh, I'll take the vinyl siding off, the original siding's still underneath, and proceeded to register the building. So materials are very important. And it's not just exterior materials. Interior materials are also looked at very closely, especially for residential buildings. So like this house has its original Douglas fir floors. It has its original K-neck ceiling. It has its original doors, which in this case from the 50s, it's single pattern. It has its original doorknob, hinges. Closets are original, still have little built-in shelves in the closet. So that's looked at quite closely as well. Sometimes we'll go into some houses and everything becomes very subjective. Well, the floors are no longer, they've got new, whatever you call that kind of laminated floors. But if that's the only change, maybe it'll go okay because everything else looks very historic. But if you start having 2 or 3, oh, they got vinyl windows too, oh, maybe we aren't going to do it. So it depends on how much change. Some changes happen, some don't. And also some changes are less important. Changes to the living room, dining room, that area are very important. But you get to secondary spaces like bathrooms, especially something like that, where people change it very often. And so there's more flexibility with how much of the original material may still be there. Same thing with kitchens. People, some reason or another, love to remodel their kitchens. And so quite often, that's another area where it's not a deal breaker, if the kitchen does not have all its original features. One thing though that is more of a deal breaker, they don't like it when you blew the wall out between the kitchen and the living room to make it one big space, because then you've totally sort of changed the historic look that way. So that becomes a problem. But sometimes that can be overcome too. Design, which is what we're starting to get into, blowing out walls and stuff, is another very important part of how a building looks. This is in the heart right away, the Gasbro building, which probably can be registered. Just look, I don't know the inside, but from the outside it looks very much like it can, because it looks essentially as it did. There's some things that's not original over here, but it's fairly small. And so you still get a fairly strong sense of what the building is, and so I think the design is probably okay. This is another house that was registered around a year or so ago, which again, it keeps its original design fairly much intact. Although there has been changes to this house. Originally, the porch wrapped around the side. In the 1930s, they closed the porch. But it was done 90 years ago, so it's become part of the history of the house. So some changes that happened over 50 years ago will be looked on. Okay, how much does that contribute to the history of the house? This house also had a more recent change. They expanded the kitchen in the back. But again, it's in the back. It's not something your eye is drawn to. And so again, they were able to say, yes, this can be registered. Workmanship comes into play somewhat. Usually if you have your original materials, you have your original design, you have your original workmanship. Again, here's the stone, very nice craftsmanship. Izumo Taisha mission, which Bill showed you, built with no nails. And so that's still there. Location is also important. Usually sites that are moved or buildings that are moved cannot be registered. The only time they can be registered is if they're significant because of their architecture. This is the Inari Shrine, which is now in the Waipahu Cultural Garden Park. It used to stand on King Street, but they thought the design, the architecture is significant. It was registered because of that, even though the fact it had been moved to a new location. Setting is also an important thing. I should stress, you don't need to have all 7 aspects of integrity to be intact. We've registered the Moana Hotel, but its setting is totally different than it was in 1901. So sometimes that's something that is taken into consideration. Oh, the building's still strong enough. And sometimes, because the setting is totally changed, it makes the building more prominent as far as a historic landmark. But sometimes the setting becomes very important. This is a townhouse complex on Diamond Head. If it doesn't have its landscaping, doesn't have all the townhouses, all of a sudden the significance is going to be greatly diminished. The historic character is going to be greatly diminished. So the setting comes into play in something like this. Other things are associations. This is St. Joseph Church on Molokai. It was a church started by Father Damien. So it's important because of that association with Father Damien. But you can also have other types of associations. This is the 49er Diner in Pearl City. It was started in 1947 by 2 brothers who had been in the 442nd, the Nisei, And the reason it was nominated and registered was because of the fact of the cultural change of the Japanese no longer working on the plantation, the Japanese going out and establishing businesses. And so for that reason, the building was registered. And finally, feeling. Feeling is just saying, okay, yeah, this feels like from the past. And these are just two houses, or you can see by greatly different. Here's one house from the 1960s, which very definitely has a modern feeling from the 50s. So and here's another house, this is Schumann Residence, and from 40 years before, in 1920s. But you go into the house, oh, wow, this looks old. And so, again, a very subjective sense. But we try to have as many aspects of integrity. Oh, yes.
About feeling, you did mention that it has to feel like it's in the past, and feeling is a subjective thing. When do things such as like settings that have taken place in like maybe the 2000s or in the 90s or 80s, those are starting to come up as 20 years old, 30 years old, maybe even 40 or 50. When can they start being nominated for being registered?
Okay, I'm sorry, I should have mentioned that earlier. One of the requirements to be registered is you're supposed to be at least 50 years old. You asked, how old does a building have to be? And so it's 50. So right now, we're looking at 1975. Anything built before that. Well, the townhouses were from 1972. It's one of the newer ones I've done. And becoming more interesting as far as what can be registered. But yeah. And again, in addition to integrity, integrity is actually the big pump. If you can show that the building has integrity, I had somebody from the Park Service tell me maybe 40 years ago, if the building has integrity and you can't register it, you're not doing your job. And I think that's pretty much true because the criteria, once you say it's has integrity, then they say, okay, it also has to meet one of 4 criteria. And but the criteria in and of themselves are very, very broad, and therefore, quite often, people with knowledge should be able to justify why the building or site is important. Criterion A is very broad. Relates to historical events and patterns. And essentially it says the property represents a specific event marking an important moment in American history or prehistory, or, and this becomes a big or, it reflects a pattern of events or a historic trend that made a significant contribution to the development of a community, state, or the nation. So this is how the 49er diner very easily gets registered, because it reflects a historic trend that was happening in Hawaii at that time. Several buildings that I've worked on in the past, I think, show this. This is one I'm still trying to work on. This is the Mackay Golf Course at Princeville. Again, a 1972 property. And, but again, important. I'm saying that it's important for its associations with the history of golf in Hawaii. And I did a whole presentation on when golf started in Hawaii, and that there originally was all country clubs, But then all of a sudden, after the war, especially starting in the 1960s and 70s, golf became associated with resorts. And this golf club is a very good example of that. I also talked about the fact that if it wasn't for the golf course, Princeville would have a much more difficult time of even getting developed, because they used the golf course as the open space for the development. They used the golf course as a marketing thing. Why do people go to Princeville? It's not the beach. You go to Princeville to play golf. And so these things come out. And so again, a historic trend, and think it that way. Another interesting building that was registered, this is the ILWU Hall in Honokaa. And again, in 1940, Hawaii was one of the least organized states or territories in America as far as unionization went. By 1948, it was one of the most highly organized states. And it was mainly because of the ILWU unionizing the plantation workers. So this plantation building in Honokaa is very much related to the whole union movement and the fights that were made at that time. It's also tangentially also interesting in that it's a Quonset hut. And actually it came from Camp Tawara, which was up on Kohala Mountains there, just up the road from Honokaa. And so it was moved down. So here's a building that was moved, but didn't become important until after it was moved. And so again, it's associations with memories of Camp Tawara, because there's not too much left of that anymore. So it's another association. This is a little modest bungalow house. This is down at the base of Diamond Head Terrace. And again, I did register because of its architecture, but I also registered because of community development. And this is another easy association to work on. Again, this reflects the development of this subdivision in Honolulu. You can also register properties for their associations with an important person. Simple example is Washington Place, associations with the Kalani. Other ones have become less noticeable. This house is on University Avenue, and it originally was a Western style house. In 1960, it was redesigned by Ernest Hara into a Japanese style house. And the owner of the house at the time was Kazuo Yamane. And I usually do not register houses because of association with people, because one of the directions from the National Park Service is if you're registering it, you're going to have to show that it is the most important property associated with that person. And so if you have to start then digging, okay, what other buildings are they associated with? Imani, not only associated with this house, he also designed, not designed, he developed Kalihi Shopping Center. He developed Leeward Bowl, Windward Bowl, and a couple of those, but I made the case that this is where he lived. This is why it's most important. And okay, well, so what? Who's Mr. Yamane? Why is he so important that his house should be registered? Mr. Yamane, second generation Japanese. He went in the 1930s, lived in Japan for a number of years, actually was in the Japanese military, comes back to Hawaii, and in 1941 gets drafted just before the war. And once the war breaks out in 1943, they were all mobilized into the 100th Battalion, And he became a member of that and went to Wisconsin for training. While in Wisconsin, the military came around and said, we're looking for people to join military intelligence and learn language training. We're looking for people that know Japanese. And so he volunteered for that. He said over 150 people have volunteered to do that. And he was one of 60 that were chosen. And after he went through his training, he was stationed in Washington, D.C. at the Pentagon. He was the first Japanese American to walk into the Pentagon after the war started. One of the jobs he was given, we got these 20 boxes of material that we got from Saipan after we liberated it from the Japanese. We don't think anything has military significance, but do you mind going through these 20 boxes and seeing what's in it? And so he started doing that. Oh, here's an interesting book. It's on the Army, Japan's Army Ordnance Inventory. The book contained every place in Japan that was making weapons. It contained everything as to where the weapons were being stored. Whoa, that's something. And they started saying, you start translating that book as fast as you can. And he was having to put out like 15 pages a day. Every day he translated it. It went to military intelligence, and it was broadcast out. Here's where we should be bombing. And so it was very important that way. And so for that reason, we nominated for associations this house. Then criterion C, which is what I usually use when I nominate properties, is for its architecture. And again, it's very broad language. Embodies distinctive characteristics of a type, period, or method of construction. Show me a building that doesn't reflect its period. It's hard to find. So usually that's what I'm using. This building is typical of its time. It's typical of the way the architect designed the building. And so again, very broad, and as long as it has integrity, it should be able to get through. They also say buildings that represent the work of a master or possess high artistic value. And then finally, they say represent a significant distinguishable entity whose components may lack individual distinction. And those would be historic districts. That's how we registered Chinatown. Because maybe, okay, all the buildings are sort of all the same, but it makes a statement in themselves. Same thing with the townhouses. It's the group together that does it. So, again, here's some fairly modest houses that have been registered, but very typical. This house was in Makiki, was built, designed by its Chinese owner. The whole street, as a matter of fact, was developed by people of Chinese ancestry, and it was built by City Mill. And so it not only has the architecture, but also just the associations in that sort of way. This is another house. This is down at the base of Diamond Head, but very much a modest house done in the 1950s using concrete block brick, which you don't see, but you saw in the 50s and 60s. Here's another house. This one's in Manoa, but essentially a tract house. And so those all count. And criteria D is sites. And again, property must have or have had information to contribute to our understanding of human history or prehistory. So archaeological sites will be registered under this. And again, it's very rare that an archaeological site has no information. Also, sites can includes places where something happened. We registered many years ago a hill, or part of a hill above Kahuku, because on that hill, there was a little truck parked, which had a radar station inside it, and it picked up the Japanese Air Force coming in to bomb Pearl Harbor. It was the first time in warfare where radar worked, although the people didn't believe it. So that hill was registered as the site of where the first use of radar in wartime happened. Essentially, the process to get registered starts with submission of the nomination to the state. As I said, the review board meets 4 times a year. The state requires to get on one of those meeting agendas, you must submit a nomination 4 months in advance. So you always have to do that at that time. A nomination may be submitted by anyone. Property owner, Preservation Commission, a government, any interested party can submit a nomination. Property owner notification and opportunity to comment is required. So whenever a nomination is going before the Historic Places Review Board, the property owner will be given 45 days notice of the meeting and instructed that they can present testimony at the meeting. The owner consent is not required to be put on the Hawaii Register. To be put on the National Register, you do have to have owner consent. So if it goes to the review board says, yes, we'll send it to the National Register. If the property owner says, we object, we don't want it, the National Park Service says, that's okay, we won't put you on. But we think it probably is eligible. So we'll put it in another category called eligible, which if you're eligible, you don't get any benefits. But because you're eligible, we'll still review your property if it's going up for development. And this is something I think a lot of people don't realize, that even at the state level, agencies, if they're giving permits, they have to go to the state and say, is this property eligible? And even though it's not on the register, then it receives the same review protections as if it's on the register. And so some people, I don't want to be on the register because then I'm going to have to go through all this. You're going to have to go through all that anyway. Registration does help if you're not on the register. Building permits for private homes will not be affected, but if it's a larger development, then they will be affected. So, as I said earlier, the state will review the nomination. They'll send it. Also, each island, we have a local preservation commission, and Kauai, Maui, and Big Island all review nominations as well. We're waiting to see if Honolulu does that or not. But they will also put in their comments and thoughts on the nomination. Then it goes to the Historic Places Review Board. They will put sites onto the Hawaii Register, and they will recommend them to the National. And then the National Park Service, or National Register, will review the site and again decide whether to put it on or not. Once a property is listed, you can apply for the tax incentives. For the federal commercial tax credit, you can actually start the process before it's registered, but you have to get the property registered within a year of your application. So that's something you have to be working concurrently. You can actually be rehabilitating your building at the same time that you're working to register the building. for the property tax exemptions from the county, you have to be on the register already. And for the residential ones, there's certain requirements. You must maintain the building in residential use for 10 years. And like I said before, the exterior must be visible from the street or allow for viewing monthly. Also, the house must be kept in average condition, and there's a plaque that must be put out by the street so people know it's on the register. For commercial properties, the property owner has to develop a maintenance plan for their building, and that must be recorded in the Bureau of Conveyances. And also, again, it must be maintained and in use for 10 years. So that's all I have to tell you. And if you have any other questions, I'll be happy to answer them.
So after 10 years, do you have to reapply to get your money?
No, the way this county laws work is you apply for the tax reduction, and you have to apply by September. December 1 every year you have to apply. The county doesn't say anything to you until December, when people get their assessment books. And then they'll say, oh, you're historic. Then you have to put up your plaque. And when they say you're historic, it's good for 5 years. At the end of the 5 years, the county automatically renews it for the second 5 years. Then, from that point, at every 5-year interval, the county can say, we're stopping this. Or the property owner can say, we're going to start paying taxes again. Once the property owner says we're going to start paying taxes again, they're off the hook for any back taxes. And they don't have to worry about that. So that's what happens with that. Yes.
I'm wondering what would happen if, say, that historic building is like part of like, say, a massive building, like say an apartment in like a 50-story building or something like that somehow. Like it's part of a big complex or something.
So, okay.
Can you repeat
Yeah.
the question?
The question was, what happens if it's, the property is part of a larger
Yeah.
unit? Number one, we wouldn't register just like one apartment building, one apartment unit. To register, we register entire buildings. We don't register a part of the building. So that one, and even like a, you know, so, and it becomes interesting. I registered one cooperative apartment building with the Tahitian, and as soon as I registered, they were all excited. Oh, we can get property tax exemption now. The county changed the law and said only residential properties that can get property tax deductions are single family and duplex. So they cannot. And when I was talking to some, actually it was people who give you homeowners insurance, and they said, you don't really have to register high-rises, apartments. They're going to be very difficult to destroy. And number one, you're going to have to get all the property owners to agree to this idea. And even more difficult, you're going to have to get all the banks that have mortgages on this building to agree. So they think it's going to be very difficult to tear down a condominium. And it could be very true. Anything else?
Thank you, Donald. Really, really appreciate it.